this video might be seen by people outside of India who might not know you, just your background and how you're known and respected in India.
Well, I'm a Bengalorean born here, and I'm a chartered accountant by profession. I have a deep interest in societal issues. I have a degree in law. I practiced as a chartered accountant, joined Infosys in 1994. I stepped down from Infosys in 2011. Now I'm the chairman of a education group called Manipal. I'm the chairman of Manipal Global Education. Along with Kiran Majumdar, we have founded the Bangalore Political Action Committee to work on issues regarding citizens, to enhance the connect between political leaders and citizens, to improve voter awareness and voter, a capability to vote in the elections and bring in good governance. We're essentially working for good governance to BPAC, which is the Bangalore Political Action Committee. And we are involved in many social causes, involved in running the largest midday meal program in the world called Akshaya Patra, which currently feeds 1.3 million people. But generally, as a citizen, I'm very concerned about the way our society is evolving, about the way governance is happening in this country, about the feudal nature of our country, and the fact that the rights given to us by constitutions are not enjoyed by everybody in our society.
You know, it's interesting you mention that. I've talked to a lot of Indians who don't know that the Indian Constitution guarantees certain rights. In fact, this phrase human rights is often misunderstood. When you're well experienced, but if somebody were to ask you, what is this human rights business? What does it mean?
Well, let me say this. I believe, as believed by people in political theory, that people are sovereign and people are born free. When we get together in a society, the rights that we have given to us by a maker, whoever that maker is, we give it to an organized body called the government. The government derives its right from the people. And the rights that we give to the government include the monopoly right of violence to protect ourselves. So the government, which derives rights from us, rules us with our leave and for our benefit. And the rights that the government has and the rights the citizens has is enshrined in the Constitution. So I'm very clear that people are sovereign and people are free, and the government is an instrumentality that we have created to an organization called the state to rule over us and make sure that our lives are protected, our rights are protected, and we can have a good quality of life. In India, we have a constitution which guarantees everything, which we got after a long-led freedom movement. And the constitution is possibly the most liberal constitution in the world, which gives us an enormous range of rights. So we are not beholden to the government for a right to life or for our rights. We're not beholden. It is a natural right. And the government does not enforce the right. We have protection to the courts. Now the situation in India is, we are a very feudal country. People are not well educated. People do not understand the constitution right. And they think whatever rights they got is because of the patronage of the state. And for them, the state means the ministers and everybody sitting down in government. It goes back to the old era when there were kings who gave who had the right of life and death over the subjects. And people believed that they lived by the leave of the king. Now we have to dispel all this. And to me, human rights are very important, because to me, the most important asset is my life.
So just to understand, you think that a lot of people in India, probably around the world, think that they are given rights by government, and therefore, through whether it's corruption or patronage or all kinds of games, they try to get these rights when they actually have these rights.
Absolutely. I mean, the rights are given to them by the Constitution, and the government is subject to the Constitution. The Constitution is supreme. I mean, it is not a patronage rights that we get. For example, my right to protection of the state is given to me by my Constitution. And the government has a right to defend the territorial integrity of the state, the right to enforce law and order, the right to treat people equally. So the right to justice is all enshrined in the Constitution.
So, you know, human rights is such a universal thing. We're saying that everybody has certain rights. Everybody, no matter who we are, no matter what. Why is it often so divisive? No,
it's very divisive because people interpret human rights in very many ways. Because when you talk about human rights, you talk about programs enforcing human rights. And many people are very conservative. For example, take the death penalty. All right? In many countries, people want the death penalty for criminals who have committed crimes against people, who have killed people. They want the death penalty. Now, human rights activists all over the world could legitimately say the death penalty is wrong because the death penalty is a grand finale for anybody's life, and no society has the right to take away anybody's life. You could punish a person for a grave crime like a murder, or killing children in cold blood, or whatever it is, but taking away somebody's life is wrong because it could be a wrong decision. You might not have evidence. They want to give the burden of proof to the person who's committed the crime. Now, that's a point of view. Then there are human rights activists who believe that the Maoists and the killers, Naxalite killers, have human rights. You have the People Union for Civil Liberty who comes down and protests every time a Naxalite or a Maoist is killed in a police operation, but we don't see the same kind of alacrity or protest when ordinary citizens are killed. So when people take different positions, it's true that there is a debate and there is very divisive opinions on this issue.
So the core of it seems to be a misinterpretation, I wouldn't say misinterpretation, a variety of interpretations about what human rights are.
Both sides.
Both sides.
It's both sides. I mean, you can't blame only people for thinking something in human rights. You know, activists too have extreme views.
You know, it's a funny thing, I often mention this, in America, I knew at age 10 all kinds of rights. I knew I had a right to a lawyer if I ever got, I'm a 10-year-old. I'm not going to get arrested, but I know my rights. And I see that that lack of education is quite large here in India.
No, but we must understand American society and why it works. In American society, the Constitution gives right to the government to rule over the people, and what is not in the Constitution belongs to the people. So people are aware of the rights, and they want to keep the government at bay.
But it was
in
actually
countries like India, the rights of the citizen are defined in the Constitution, and what is not in the Constitution belongs to the government. And countries like India have come from a very feudal past. Countries like the UK have come from a feudal past. So there's a lot of feudalism in people's thinking.
The thinking has to change.
The thinking has to change, and that will change when we evolve into a truly democratic, open society where everybody is aware of rights, and the rights are protected by social organizations like, let's say, Amnesty.
So Amnesty, so in some sense, the government should be doing the protection of the rights. But,
but I think the problem is that we need to have a large-scale educational program for young people, for schools and colleges and citizens, telling them about their rights. Because only when citizens stand up and assert their right will the state accept its obligation to enforce this right. Because please remember, the feudal mindset that pervades government in many countries like India treats people like serfs, treat people like, like, let's say, subjects. Not as individuals with their own rights. You go to a government office, they make you wait, they don't treat you well, they think they're doing you a favor. Nobody does you a favor. You are asking for what is due to you.
Let me ask you, this might be a controversial question, but I'm really interested in how you think, because I think a lot of people in India, it's not a clear thing. Do you think human rights, say, freedom of expression, or however you want to talk about it, you can take some very easy ones. Now, of course, there's contexts and situations where it's not applicable. Do you think, though, human rights should vary according to culture, or are they?
No, I think human rights are universal. It cannot vary to according to culture. You cannot be half free or semi-free, 3/4 free. You are free. You're a free human being. There is a universal declaration of human rights for the UN, which is the document for all of humanity on this planet. And I think human rights are universal. They cannot be constricted by anybody or anybody's thinking. It's just that people don't stand up for their own rights.
So what role do you think Amnesty can play in that? Or any
Amnesty has many roles to play. One role is education, to make sure that people understand what their rights are. And the second role is advocacy, to make sure the rights are enforced. And third is by research, pointing out areas where rights are not being enforced. And possibly fourth is mobilizing public opinion to make sure that enlightened citizens stand up for their rights and for rights of people who don't have an education, who are victims of the state and who are illiterate, who are just hauled up by the police and put in jail, are ill-treated. For example, our literacy rate is 78%. Maybe 60% of people in this country are very extremely poor who don't know their rights. They think that the policeman is a daroga, policeman or the daroga is an agent of the king or the agent of the government, and they bow before them.
Let's take so this is one where the government has to do its obligation within India. Let me do a little bit trickier thing. One of Amnesty's campaigns is for migrant rights. Hundreds of lakhs of people are going to the Gulf, a lot from, say, Kerala, and whether it's recruitment agencies, employers, some people looking out their way, there's widespread abuse, right? It's basically a form of slavery in many things. And there's a hell of a lot of corruption going on there. But even if government of India was doing everything right, it has some limitations because its borders are here and it has to work with other governments. So how do you solve transnational human rights issues, I mean, Amnesty says there's a role for Amnesty in the worldwide movement of people to care, but are there any other ways, or what's the value of this movement in this case?
I think there are ways to solve transnational issues. Just like I said, that if people outside India want to talk about abuse of human rights in India, they're free to do so. We must look at the criticism on merit and do what is required to remedy the situation. Likewise, people in the Gulf, the citizens in the Gulf rulers should look at the abuse in the system, and they must set it right. We must demand, the world must demand that they have protection for migrants, because migrants are getting exploited. You cannot go to a country where the employer takes your passport, deprives you of your right to your passport, and then ill-treats you, kills you, burns you, rapes you, and they get away. There cannot be two differential rights in any country in the world. Civilized behavior demands that everybody has equal rights. Yes, this is a guest worker who's come to your country, who's in an unequal economic condition, unequal compared to you or a citizen because they don't have voting rights, but they're entitled to dignity, they're entitled to their lives, and they're entitled to the wage for fair work. And I think we must enforce that as people of the world. I have a vested interest in making sure that the Gulf enforces. You have a vested interest. Everybody's got a vested interest. Just like I would say the discrimination the United States is doing on the H-1B issue. The H-1B legislation being written now in the United States is totally discriminatory against India. It's targeted against India. And I would think it's a gross abuse of the law. It's a gross abuse of anybody who wants to go work in the United States under a program which is authorized by the United States. It's free for everybody in the world. You can't pick and choose. That also is an abuse. We stand up and protest against that.
There's a civil rights leader, Martin Luther King, he said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice.
Injustice anywhere is a threat against human civilization.
Absolutely.
And we don't have to get picky or scared about this injustice claim for the simple reason that these are transactions. These are transactions. That means it's like a court. In the court, there is a case, the case is heard, the case is over, conviction otherwise, and it's over. Then the next case. But these are all transactions. You don't carry the transaction to the next transaction. The next transaction should start with zero base. Suppose Amnesty stands up, accuses the government of India of ill-treating under trials, and that issue is solved. Then Amnesty goes and picks up another issue. Now, if there's rancor in the old issue, if the disagreement in the old issue, the anger about the old issue should not foster to the next issue, and Amnesty should not be accused of being a foreign hand or something else. I mean, I think we have to be open as a society. That's the only way to evolve as a democratic society, where we are open to criticism, we accept criticism, we inquire into criticism and set things right.
I have two last questions. One is, when people think of charity or SSR, CSR, or sustainability, social issues, mostly, for example, kids' lunches, medicine, food, clothing, environment. And they've done these studies, and human rights, even if people even think of it, is number 15 on the list. It's because it's a little bit abstract. What do you suggest? How do we get people to understand the value of putting investment, their time, their energy, their money, their whole life into something which pays enormous returns over the long term? Meaning an investment in human rights is selfish investment because it's your own society. But it's very difficult for people to see that.
I think we must educate people to say that the most fundamental level, human rights are the most fundamental building blocks for a society. CSR in the economic sphere comes after right. Now let me take the right of a child. A child is hungry. A child has a right to food, right to life under the Constitution. It's a human rights issue. If a child is hungry, a child is deprived of food, the child is in the care of the parents, and the parents ill-treat the child, the state has to step in because the child is guaranteed rights by the Constitution. And the state has to step in. If somebody goes and exposes that, it is to my mind a human rights issue. It's not a CSR issue. So we must tell people that these are fundamental issues in society which you must get over. And these fundamental issues are the rights that citizens have guaranteed to them by the Constitution. And we must work in this area to make sure that the rights are enforced by the state and people enjoy these rights without any let or hindrance. At the next level comes other CSR activities like possibly education and everything else. But today, law is evolved, thinking is evolved, where the Supreme Court has stood up and said that right to food is part of right to life. Right to education for a child is part of right to life. Okay? And possibly they may say a right to shelter is a part of right to life. right of a hawker to hawk is a part of a right to life. And I think this is the evolution of interpretation of basic human rights enshrined in the Constitution being read into something called the right to life, where the right to life is all encompassing. And in this, I think civil society has to invest, because it's only in enforcing these rights and creating a situation where everybody can enjoy the rights, I think that we can go to the next level of creating a just society. Because in a society where there's no justice, what is the point of a CSR?
No. It's there.
We need justice. We need justice for everybody. Because there's no justice, we won't have the Naxalite problem, we won't have the Maoist problem. We won't have disgruntlement, we won't have the issue that we have in Srinagar. We won't have the issues that we have in many rural areas. In rural areas, Dalit women are getting raped and women are getting burned. That's a human rights issue.
So the root cause of those injustices comes back to the abuses of the state at human rights level?
The root cause of all these injustices is the inability of the state to ensure the rights guaranteed by the Constitution, which are basic human rights. And the second root cause is the apathy of civil society, which watches the abuse of these rights to people with whom they have no connection, because they think it doesn't impact them. But what they forget is the attitude of the state, of the people who enforce the law. Their mindset is revealed in how they accept the ill treatment or ill treat a section of society. In a feudal society, the ruling class enjoys all the rights and the subjects do not enjoy the rights. And that's what is being played out in India.
In government's estimate is in the next 7 to 10 years, 20 crore people are going to move from the villages into the cities. Basically, you're going to have something like a partition level migration. And I know the cities can't handle, Mumbai cannot take another 1 million people, barely can take 5 more people coming in each day. How are we going to absorb 200 million people? Do you think there'll be civil strife? Do you think if we don't protect human rights now, this will be a very bloody period?
I won't say that when somebody migrates somewhere is a human rights issue. I think it's an economic issue first. And there's an issue of migration. But when people migrate, they must get equal rights. That's a human rights issue. The point of migration is not a human rights issue. I have a right to migrate. Yeah, that's a fundamental right. I have a right to go stay in a place. But I have no right to squat in public property. But if government finds that there is migration happening, the urbanization happening, government has got an obligation to make sure that they create the necessary infrastructure and the necessary means for people who migrate to have a decent quality of life. When I say decent quality of life, access to food, access to water, access to health, and access to education for the children. Because these are all public goods and social goods that the government is obliged to provide for everybody.
The last question, it's the hardest question I have. Gandhiji famously said he doesn't believe in rights, only duties. And I wonder what's your interpretation of that?
No, I agree with Gandhi that he doesn't believe in rights, he believes in duties. And I would interpret Gandhiji's sayings to say that I have a duty to make sure that you enjoy your human rights. And you have a duty to make sure that I enjoy my human rights. So if we focus on the duty of every individual will stand up for human rights in society. Yeah. That is much better than focus that I have this right so I can do what I want. But if I protect your rights, I'm protecting my rights myself because I created just society. Yeah. You must give credit to Gandhiji for what he said because that's what Gandhiji meant, and I think it's fantastic because it turned the tables on everybody to say that you have a duty to make sure that the rights enshrined in the Constitution are actually enjoyed by the people. That means he made all of us responsible for that, and I think that's fantastic.
Thank you very much, sir.